Yeah. I think I was always interested in the arts. I used to love reading and being read to. Uh, so I had a teacher called Mrs. King who I idolized, and she was an English teacher. And I remember her reading The Iron Man to us, Ted Hughes's short story. Um, and I just remember being absolutely enthralled and absolutely bereft when we got to the end of the lesson and she hadn't finished the story. And she knew that I was, and then suggested that if I wanted to, that if I wanted to stay back and in the break, she'd read the end of the story to me, which I thought was magical. One, because I heard the rest of the story, and two, because she took interest. She was interested enough in me to take some time out of her time and to read the story just to me. So that was always exciting to me. I loved books that imagined other worlds, and I love books that played with language because my brothers always did, and my uncles always did, and I come from a family and I suppose a tradition, a heritage, where the oral tradition is very significant, and everybody, all my uncles, aunties, etc., were all great storytellers, and I think a lot of them were illiterate, but they were incredibly articulate when it came to conveying the histories of our family and their experiences back in the homeland, back in Pakistan. So I was always really kind of sensitive to storytelling from a very, very young age, from as far back as I can remember. And any time I encountered that in school at a very young age, I was thrilled. Yeah, well, as early as I can think, I would draw images from stories, and I would write short stories. They were never uh, confessional. There were always stories about an island in the middle of the sea where a volcano suddenly erupted. Sort of disaster-laden stories, fantasy stories, and I always used words that were barely within my reach, as it were. Um, so yeah, no, I loved messing around with that all the time, and I did a lot of play at home. I mean, I was a great fan of Elvis Presley back in the day, and so I would perform his songs to my uncles and aunties, and they thought it was hilarious. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about interest in the arts, interest in language and storytelling, the arts as a kind of as a way of life, the arts, in the sense of the canon of the Western art tradition. I wasn't really encouraged by my parents because they didn't possess that in the same way. That happened after my father died, and my second eldest brother became like my father figure, and he was in his teens and he was discovering the arts right across the board. And he shared and opened up that world to us. And also, as I got into junior school, I was encountering teachers who were sharing books with us and stories with us that absolutely thrilled me. And I think it was when I was about 8 or 9, maybe, that I first was that somebody, a teacher at school, shared some Shakespeare, and it was Macbeth. Was the first thing, which I found absolutely thrilling. And at home, at the same time, my brother and us as a family, our brothers, we were recording stuff onto tape, onto cassettes. Back in the day, that's what we used. And we would play all the parts and read all the parts. And I was a Brummy Lady Macbeth at the age of about 8. So, we did Inspector Calls as well. We did the whole thing and played multiple parts. So, I mean, we were kind of really. I had a lot of exposure to the arts at home. I was pretty strong across the board. I didn't work very hard though, which is very irritating, I know, to a lot of people. But my brother was. I was always surrounded by people who cared about literature, whether it was formal literature or not. And my brother was very kind of mathematical, and he was engaged in that. So I was surrounded by those sorts of ideas and concepts from a very, very young age. So I seemed to be quite. I seemed to have a facility with a number of things. That I seemed to have a good right and left brain. I was very open to the concepts of mathematics and science, as well as art and literature. Yeah, I think definitely English and art, actually. I mean, I was very good at maths, so I enjoyed it. But in terms of what really turned me on, I think it was English and art. We did a little bit of music, and I really enjoyed that. But there wasn't a big provision there. And stuff that I would organise me and my cousins and my friends to kind of tell stories, and I know we shouldn't have been watching them, but we were great fans of the Hammer House of horror movies, and we were reading Dracula at home, and my brother was reading Frankenstein to us and stuff like this. So I would create these stories about Dr. Frankenstein, and I was always Dr. Frankenstein, going into a castle and encountering basically all the monsters I could think of, and almost dying. But just succeeding with many bruises, because I was very good at falling, I discovered. So I would make the fights as dramatic as I could make them, and I would always win at the end. And I also remember that C.S. Lewis and the Narnian books were very important, and Hugh Lofting. So we would the Dr. Dolittle books. So I mean, all the stuff that I would create for us to do in school, in whether it was in lessons or whether it was in assemblies, would be filtered through those kinds of characters and that sort of imagination. Yeah. I mean, and I think I was the prime organizer because I was just the most enthusiastic. I didn't need to be in control, but I loved inciting that kind of joy in others. I loved sharing it. It was more that, really, I think, than actually enjoying the control of a thing. I mean, it must have done. The sense I have looking back now is that we encountered lots of very complicated things when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, well, most of the 80s. I mean, there was quite a mixed community in Birmingham at the time, and there was a degree of integration, which meant that I encountered quite a lot of generous Brummies, white Brummies. But there was also quite a closed network of family, extended family. So I was always exposed to the stories and the traditions of Pakistan filtered through my family, and there seemed to be a solidarity between the Asians and the black children and the Irish, actually. And I was aware of a kind of tension. I mean, I obviously I knew intellectually, I could see that there was racism happening, but I seemed to be excluded from that for some reason. A lot of the people who might bully others saw me as kind of an exception to the rule, and I think that might have had to do with the fact that I never segregated myself. I always engaged with people straight on, full on. I was always very playful, but I was never defensive, and so I seemed to get a kind of relatively easy ride. I encountered difficulty, but and I suppose the other thing as well in Birmingham at the time with the family was that I was born in an Islamic family, so there was a kind of reading the Quran, kind of weekend Islamic kind of. We'd go to a woman's house and we'd get taught to read the Quran, and you'd encounter other kids there. But it was the sort of reading whereby you learnt it without understanding the words, so you learnt the sound of it, the music of it.